Welcome to the Growth Network. And welcome to Resilience Communities. This is Session 1, Mission. One of the core principles of the Growth Network and Resilience Communities is community before content. It is estimated that the total knowledge of the human race now doubles every 12 hours. It used to take 1,000 years. The truth is we don't need more content. If you are a teacher, for example, you will have been through teacher training and you will have ongoing professional development. And therefore, you've got lots of content coming at you all the time. We're not trying to add to that. What we believe here at the Growth Network is that you need community to be able to process that content and to be able to put it into practice in the right way. And that's why the principle here is community before content. At the core of the work we're going to be doing over these 4 videos is the concept of the rule of life. And these 4 videos are really intended to enable you to create a rule of life which will be your guide through the coming year and hopefully through several years to come. The rule of life is made up of 5 different key concepts: mission, values, objectives, habits, and community. Each of those will form the focus of one of these videos, with habits and community coming together to make the final video. The rule of life is central to all of the work we're going to do through these 4 videos. And as we just saw, there are 5 different categories of information to go into the rule of life. And although you can see at the bottom there are 2 calendars, we're not going to talk about those. They're for later, once we start the resilience communities. For now, though, the purpose of these videos is to complete those boxes, to identify a mission statement, some values, objectives for the short term and the longer term, and some supportive habits and community. On the next slide, you will see a copy of the workbook, which we're going to be using to work through all of these videos. And in the back of the workbook, there is a copy of the rule of life, which is where you'll want to write the final versions of each of these different things. And as I said, these are the 4 sessions: mission, values, objectives, habits, and community. And today we'll begin with mission, identifying your professional purpose as an educator. And in this session today, we are going to focus on understanding the significance of mission and creating a personal mission statement. The psychologist Viktor Frankl said, "When we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves." This is very much at the heart of what we're talking about in resilience communities. Schools, the education system as a whole, can be very stressful places to work, very complicated places to work. And we may wish that the system would change, whether that's the system of the particular place we work or the system as a whole. The truth is, though, however senior we are in that system, we have very limited agency to be able to really make change. However, the one thing we do have control over is ourselves. So the focus of resilience communities is not on changing the system, whether that be the system of a department or a school or the whole country. The focus is on changing ourselves so that we are better able to cope within the system and to flourish and thrive and to make a really positive contribution. So let's talk about mission. We're going to think about mission in terms, first of all, of contracts. All of us working in schools or educational businesses, local authorities or trusts will have a contract. And this is an example of a typical teacher's contract. You're familiar with contracts. On the one hand, they tell you what you need to do. And on the other hand, they tell you what your employer will do. You have certain tasks to do, and the employer undertakes to provide a salary and support and limits the number of hours that you work. And basically, this is how any job operates, that we contract to do certain things, and in return, we receive certain things. But the second concept we want to think about here, which is the psychological contract. And you can see the definition here, an informal agreement between an employer and employee that describes their relationship. Education perhaps has a particularly significant place for informal contracts, meaning that very often there are things that are not on that contract we just looked at, which are expected of us when we go to work. It might be expected, for example, that in certain schools you would offer a club as part of your role. That may not be on the contract, it may just be what happens in this school. And there are lots of different examples, large and small, of things that the employer expects informally of the employee, and the employee expects informally of the employer. The second concept, or the second way of looking at our mission, is to consider the concepts of job and vocation. You could say the job identifies with the first contract we looked at, the legal contract. If you come to work every day to do a job, you will look at the contracted tasks and you will complete them and expect in return to receive your salary for doing that. The consequences of that attitude to work are that the task will get completed and you will probably work within your limits, both physically and emotionally. Potentially, you could do more. Potentially, you could have stronger relationships with stakeholders like your colleagues, parents, and students. But you would be fulfilling your contract. Let's think about work from the perspective of vocation, though. If we have a vocational attitude to work, we are more likely to do everything that's asked of us and potentially to do much more than that. Vocation, we could say, is fulfilling the informal contract. And as I said before, this is very often very strong in education. There is a lot to do which is not on the contract, but it is still expected of us, and maybe we expect that of ourselves. The consequences are we get more done than is expected. We get a sense of achievement and we have an impact on the people that we're working for and with. And as a consequence, we are likely to build much stronger relationships with our colleagues, students, and parents. But there are risks attached. Potentially, we will exceed our limits physically and emotionally. And that can lead to negativity. It can lead to passivity. It can lead to burnout. At the end of this slide, there's an opportunity to pause the video and just think about where you would place yourself on this spectrum between job and vocation. Very few people are going to put themselves at either extreme. So you'll want to think about, are you closer to the job end, focused on getting the task done and receiving the salary at the end of the month? Or do you have a great vision for what you can achieve through your work, in which case you'll be closer to the vocation end? Of course, nobody's at either extreme. So just pause the video now and have a think about where would you place yourself between those two ends of the spectrum. Next, we want to think about the two core values of the growth network, which are integrity and dignity. Now, we're going to use these two words in a particular sense for the purposes of what we're doing here. We're going to consider integrity to be doing your job to the best standard that you possibly can. And secondly, we're going to think about dignity. For the purposes of our rule of life, we're going to consider dignity as looking after yourself as well as you possibly can. Now we're going to stop the video again in just a moment, and if you return to the workbook, you'll see this diagram. And again, you're just going to place yourself on the diagram in the place that you think is most appropriate. We've already talked about job and vocation, and now we're going to think about where you would place yourself between dignity and integrity. It's worth saying these things are not opposites, but they certainly have a tension between giving your best to work and giving your best to yourself. And as you pause the video this time, just think about, where would you place yourself between job and vocation, between dignity and integrity? Is it more in the job and dignity quadrant in the top left, where you come to work and you make sure you look after yourself? Or are you more in the vocation integrity quadrant in the bottom right, where you might be more focused on doing the job as well as you possibly can, and as we often say, going above and beyond? Or is it somewhere completely different? Just pause the video, take as long as you want, and come back when you're ready. Now, having done that, it's a really good moment just to pause and consider two things. The first is the difference between where you really are on that diagram and where you would be ideally. You may, for example, have put yourself very much into integrity and vocation, but feel like you need to give more focus to dignity and potentially move back in the direction of job, maybe vice versa. The question is why? Think about, why is there a gap between where you really are and where you ideally are? Perhaps there isn't, but for most of us there will be a difference. And then consider why. How does this relate to your personal history? For example, what was your experience of school as a student? Your character. Is your character somebody who works very hard, somebody who's a perfectionist? What other things might be influencing the way that you would like to be and the way you actually are? Current circumstances will have a big impact. You may be new to teaching. You may have just had children. You may be close to retirement. All of these things will affect the way that you view your work. And finally, there's beliefs. We all come to work with philosophical beliefs, with religious beliefs, and all sorts of different kinds of belief, which dictate the way in which we approach our work. Again, just pause the video. There's some space this time for you to journal or to note some thoughts on those issues, and just consider why you have placed yourself on that diagram in the places that you have. Again, when you're ready, come back and restart the video. Now, just to remind you again, we are not talking here about changing the system. You may be somebody in a position to do that, and you may think that what we're talking about here would influence the way in which you lead, and that's great. But the real focus, and before we make any changes to the system, the real focus is on ourselves. We are challenged to change ourselves. That's what we really want to think about. And that brings us to mission statements. A mission statement is a concise description of what an organization or team does, outlining its purpose and how it contributes to the world. You'll be familiar with mission statements from all sorts of organizations, schools and hospitals and businesses, and these are why most organizations have them. First of all, it gives us a reason why we exist, a purpose. Second, it gives direction. Third, guardrails. Mission statements are very good at telling us as much about what we don't do as about what we do, so we don't wander off into doing unnecessary things. And in that respect, it helps us stay aligned, again, focused on the direction that we're trying to travel in and what we're trying to achieve. And finally, it energizes. When an organization has a clear mission, it gives people the energy to go and do that task day after day because they know what it is that they're expecting to do and what they're expecting to achieve. Let's take this example here from Starbucks. To be the premier purveyor of the finest coffee in the world, inspiring and nurturing the human spirit, one person, one cup, and one neighborhood at a time. You may have views about that mission statement and that particular organization, but you can see from the statement what they're aiming to achieve. And maybe when you do go into a Starbucks, you can get a sense of why they do some of the things that they do. But we are thinking about mission statements personally. And so I've just retranslated that mission statement to be a personal definition, a concise description of what I do, outlining my purpose and how I contribute to the world. Here's some other examples from businesses. Nike, you can see on the left, to bring inspiration, innovation to every athlete in the world. And on the right-hand side, some mission statements from different backgrounds. For example, at the top there, to inspire success through teaching. Now, this is one from a school which I found online. Learning to succeed, provide the best opportunities, academic, cultural and sporting, and a sense of moral and social responsibility. There's actually a huge amount in this mission statement, and an organisation which has adopted a statement like this has set itself a big task. It's a good one, but definitely requires some real thought and some real care about how you go about achieving it. So again, we're going to pause the video, and this is a big question. Okay, so we're not just talking about a career mission statement here, but we're also thinking about our personal lives. What are the things you would want to include in your mission statement? On the right-hand side, there's a list of thoughts that you might want to consider. What do you want to achieve? How important are relationships? What are your values and attitudes, moods and emotions? What passions do you have and what strengths do you have? What are your goals and aspirations? What legacy would you like to leave behind? Quite importantly, what are your limitations? We might want to change the world, but remember, we're all about focusing on changing ourselves. What is it that we can achieve within the limitations that we have? Again, just pause the video, take as long as you want, and make some notes. Don't try to write a mission statement straight away unless you've got a really clear idea, but just jot down some ideas. What are the things that you'd want to include? And remember that balance between career and personal life. You may have massive hopes for one of those two areas of life, but of course these two things impact on one another. Again, as soon as you're ready, just come back and restart the video. As soon as you think you've got a mission statement, go to your rule of life and write it into that box at the top of the page. Remember, this is a working document, so you might want to make some changes to that going forward, but for now, just write in what you think is best. Hopefully this video has given you plenty to think about, but if you'd like to read some more, there's some resources here which might be of interest to you. Otherwise, the next video will be on values.